Hello everyone and welcome to Big Rock Moto. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I have two favors to ask of you. One, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. And two, whenever you're shopping for stuff, use my affiliate links. All right, this is the 2025 BMW R1300GS Adventure, and it's BMW's flagship adventure touring motorcycle. Now, I've already done an in-depth review series on the standard R1300GS, so what are the differences with the Adventure? Well, you can see fuel tank is much larger, you get more standard equipment, more wind protection. So there's a few different videos that I produced using this bike. This in-depth review here, and this video we're going to do the specs and features, show you all the detail stuff. I'll give you my riding impressions both on and off-road. We'll do pros and cons, competition, and then we'll have final thoughts. There's a couple other videos floating around out there that I've done with this bike. One is a trip I did up to near San Francisco and back on this bike, so it's kind of a touring style trip. You could check that out. And I'm also doing a dedicated video to a feature this bike has, which is called the ASA, or Automated Shift Assistant, which is a pretty cool new system from BMW that gives you an automatic shifting mode and a manual shifting mode, but does away with the clutch lever. So check out that other content as well. But for this video, we're going to do our typical in-depth review. All right, let's talk about seat heights and ergonomics with the new GSA. This is a particularly important subject in this video because there's a lot going on here depending on what suspension and what seat option that you get. All right, so first of all, if we just compare standard seats and standard suspension, no adaptive ride height control or any of that, the new GSA is about 3/4 inch or about 20 millimeters lower to the ground in terms of seat height than the outgoing 1250 GS. So we're already a little bit closer to the ground. That does not mean it's less comfortable or has less legroom or is a smaller bike, as some people have suggested. That's wrong. It's important to understand the difference between legroom and seat height. These are two different things, and a lot of people out there, from what I've seen, are really getting this wrong, getting it mixed up. The legroom is the distance between the seat and the foot peg, and that determines the bend in your knee when riding and ultimately how comfortable your legs feel. The seat height is the distance between the seat and the ground. It affects your reach to the ground. These things, while they are related, they are actually independent of each other. For instance, if you change the seat of the bike, you'll change both. But if you change the foot peg position, you'd only change one of those measurements. And then suspension also plays into it a lot as well. All right, so the seat heights for the new GSA have a huge range. I think it's anywhere between about 31 inches up to 35 or 36 inches, depending on the suspension options you get and the seat options that you get. I'm going to put a chart here somewhere on the screen to make this more clear and to show you based on what seats you have and what suspension package you have, what your seat height will be, and also comparing it to the old bike. Now, why do I make such a big deal out of this? Well, because most people are not super tall, and these bikes have historically been too tall for average people to ride. That's different now with the new GSA, and I think that's a great thing. It makes it accessible to more people, more riders. So there's two different adaptive ride heights you can get. You can get the regular adaptive ride height, which drops the bike 30 millimeters or about 1.3 inches whenever you're stopped. So what it does is that when you're decelerating, before you get to a stop, the bike quickly drops that amount. So when you get to a stop, you have a much easier reach to the ground. When you take off, the motorcycle quickly raises as you're accelerating so that when you're riding, you have the full benefit of the long travel suspension of these bikes without the drawback of that super tall seat height that sometimes could come with that. It's a great feature. Now, what they also have is adaptive ride height comfort. And what that does is it takes 20 millimeters out of the total suspension travel, lowering the bike another 20 millimeters or about 3/4 of an inch on top of the adaptive ride height, which already gives you 30 millimeters or 1.3 inches. So this particular bike has adaptive ride height comfort. And so it is really, really nice and low to the ground compared to if this bike did not have that feature. we would be about 2 inches, or about, what is that, 50 millimeters higher seat height. By the way, none of this changes the legroom. None of this changes this right here. This is the same. This is only going to change if you change the seat. Now, there are low and tall seats available, which will change your legroom position. Now, if you're smart, and many of you are, you will have just realized what I just said and what this means, which is that if you get the adaptive ride control comfort and you get a tall seat, you'd have the magic combination of a lot of legroom, but a really easy reach to the ground, even if you're just of average height. That's fantastic, and that is something you cannot get with the older GSs and the older BMWs. So this adaptive ride control feature is way better than people realize, and allows you to have a comfortable riding position with a ton of legroom, which this bike has, but a super easy reach to the ground. I'm 5'10" or 1.78 meter, and you can see this is really nice and low. It is not a tall, tippy feeling bike like the outgoing GS Adventure was. 2 huge thumbs up. Now, in terms of the riding position itself, there's a tiny bit more emphasis going forward than the outgoing bike, and that's a good thing because it gets more weight, a little bit more weight forward into the front end, which gives you better grip and better traction, better road feel. All that combined with the new tail lever Evo that they have up here, such a better bike for dynamic riding than the old GS was. A little bit more control of the front. You feel more connected to the bike, more confidence to push fast on twisty roads. The old bike was already pretty good. This takes it to a whole nother level, but it's still, as you can see, super upright and super comfortable.
Huge thanks to Law Tigers for sponsoring today's video. If you've been in a motorcycle accident, I highly recommend contacting Law Tigers' nationwide network of motorcycle lawyers, because the unfortunate truth is insurance companies will try to settle with you for the bare minimum amount. Hiring Law Tigers can potentially get you covered for lost wages, pain and suffering, and more. Plus, there is no upfront cost at all to hire them. So if you've been a victim of an accident or know someone who has, please contact Law Tigers, and their information will be below. Thanks again to Law Tigers for sponsoring this video.
Doing the drop and lift test here on the GSA, we're not going to throw the bike on the ground hard because that's not very nice. It's not my motorcycle. The new crash bar design with these wingtips sort of, I'm about to show you the engineering advantage of this and why it was smart of them to do that. Now, boxer bikes have always had this advantage when they tip over, unless you really push them over past the cylinders, they tip over kind of on your crash bars. You need to have crash bars and you need to have cylinder protectors, which the new bikes have standard and the old bikes didn't, so that was a nice bonus. They only tip over, you know, I don't know the degree, it's more than 45 degrees, but they don't tip over completely flat, so they have that advantage when you go to lift them. So let's show you how this is on the 1300 Adventure. So the bike is resting on the crash bar wing there, and it's nice because it really prevents the bike. Even if I try, I really can't pull this over more than that. So I think it pretty much does away with the need for upper crash bars. Now, some of you are going to argue that for off-road in a severe accident where the bike is getting thrown down an embankment or something, that the upper crash bar could have some use, and that's probably valid. But I think for most situations, I think this is going to be adequate for tip overs and things like that. So you see, when I go to lift the bike, I'm not starting from a completely flat position. For a motorcycle that weighs in excess of 600 pounds, that's really very easy to lift. All right, let's go over the specs and then we'll take a tour, kind of show you all the cool features of this bike. So a couple notes as we start here with the specs. If you're going to purchase one of these and you're really serious about it, what's going to happen is if you just go into your BMW dealer, I don't know, wherever you are in the world, you have to understand that these bikes have so many different options and different packages. Everything from different suspension setups to different wheels to different off-road packages. And then you've got all the different colors layered on top of that. BMW makes it somewhat confusing in my opinion because they've led people to believe that if you get the trophy color scheme that is the off-road model, but that's not the case. It's really just a color scheme with maybe some tiny equipment differences, like is the turn signal in the handguard or is it going to be up on the fairing? And then to make things even more confusing, the differences are not consistent between the standard GS and the GS Adventure, with the GS Adventure having a different set of options and setups than the standard GS does. What I highly recommend doing is, depending on where you live in the world, go to the BMW online configurator for your country and play around with the options and understand what you have to choose from and what kind of setup would be best for you. And all the information throughout this video hopefully will help you do that. All right, now this motorcycle has the ASA, or the automatic shift assist transmission. I'm doing a separate video on that because I feel that's the best way to approach that. So I'm not going to go too in depth on the ASA in this video here, and that will be a separate video. So getting into the specs, the base price on a GS Adventure is $22,745 here in the USA. However, it's quite misleading because you will probably never find, unless you special order it, an actual base model, because they're all going to have the premium package, which gives you a lot of the options that you kind of in your head think are just standard on these bikes. But in fact, you can get that cheaper base bike if you really wanted to order one. The wet weight of this bike is the same as the outgoing bike. It didn't lose any weight. So it's 593 pounds or 269 kilograms. Now keep in mind when you're going to compare that to the competitors out there, that weight includes things like the center stand, the standard crash bars, the gigantic 8-gallon fuel tank, the rear pannier mounts, the rear luggage rack, the electric windshield. So there's a lot of equipment here, and you have to keep that in mind when you're looking at the weight. The engine obviously is the Boxer engine, 1300 cc, makes 145 horsepower, 110 foot-pounds, or 149 newton meters of torque. Transmissions, you have got two options. Swing around here to this side. So you can get BMW's ASA, automatic shift assist, and if you get that, which this bike has, you still get a traditional foot shift lever, but if you notice, there's no clutch. So you have the option of automatic shifting. The bike does actually engages the clutch for you electronically. You have no manual clutch control. Or you can shift with the foot lever here without using the clutch, and it's like using a quick shifter. Now, of course, you can also get just a standard regular 6-speed transmission, which will come with a quick shifter and a slipper clutch. Suspension on the GSA is one of those things that you have to research the option that you want, because there's different options available. So the GSA has always had slightly taller suspension than the regular GS, and that's still the case if you compare them apples to apples. So GSA is going to have 220 millimeters, or about 8.7 inches of travel front and back, versus the standard GS, which is around 8 inches or around 200 millimeters of travel. Now, then from there you have options of adaptive ride height in two different settings if you want to get that. And we'll talk about that system more when I do the ergonomics and seat height section. And that's something you really want to pay attention to, and don't miss that part of the video. Now, either way you go, you're still going to have dynamic ESA, so the electronic suspension adjustment, it adjusts for the load you're carrying automatically in terms of adjusting the preload. It's got the dual spring rate feature, which is phenomenal on this. You've got electronic damping that's constantly adjusting to the road and the riding conditions. So it's a highly technological, advanced suspension setup, and it works extremely well and is a huge improvement over the system that we see on the outgoing 1250 models. Brakes on these bikes are Brembo, although you do see a BMW badge. If you actually look at the back of the caliper, they're Brembo brakes, which is a good thing to see. The brakes on this bike are nothing short of exceptional, and you'll see that when we do some of the riding sections. Tires and wheels, you've got a 19-inch front on all the GSs and a 17-inch rear. Now, this bike has the spoked wheels, which are tubeless. You can also choose to get the forged Enduro wheels, which are exactly what they sound like. They're a forged wheel, and BMW says that they're strong enough for moderate off-road use. The advantage of the forged wheels would be that they have less maintenance because you don't have spoke tensions. They're easier to clean, and they're much lighter. They reduce the unsprung weight of your bike, improving significantly the handling, the acceleration, the braking, and all those things. So I would highly recommend looking at that option versus the spokes. I'm a little confused as to why people want spoke wheels on a touring bike. This bike is mostly used for touring and not off-road. Although I suppose maybe if you live somewhere where there's lots of potholes, maybe you want that slightly more flexible wheel as opposed to a forged wheel that if you bend it, it might be very difficult to repair. The electronics package on these bikes is advanced and very thorough. You get everything you can pretty much imagine. So you get a TFT dash, you get phone connectivity, you get riding modes. I'll show all this here in a minute. 6-axis IMU, inertial measurement unit. You've got radar front and back. So you've got a front radar sensor here, which picks up the traffic, what's going on in front of you. So you have radar cruise control. You have a rear radar sensor, which is this thing right here, and that allows you to have the lane change warning, LCW, or as I just call it, blind spot monitors. And you can see here in the mirror that there are little things that light up when you have somebody in your blind spot. Of course, you've got things like quick shifter, you've got configurable traction control, configurable ABS that remembers the settings, which is nice. You've got hill hold control, you've got all sorts of things. All right, so one super cool feature that you get on this bike, but only if you get the adaptive ride height control, either version of it, and you have to get that for this to work, is that it has a center stand lift assist feature. It's not a power center stand, as some people erroneously were led to believe, I think, when these came out. But what it does is it maxes out the preload to make the bike easier to put on a center stand. So how this works is that, oops, bike's in neutral there. When you put the center stand part way down, you can see the bike jacking itself up. It's using the suspension preload, the part of the adaptive ride height system, and then it's super easy to pop it up on a center stand because it makes the bike high. Another bonus of getting the adaptive ride height control. So I have to have the bike running to do this, but starting our tour with the lighting, it does have these fog lights. They're more integrated into the bodywork than the previous bikes with the little spotlights. And then you can see the array headlight here, and you can see this bike has the turn signals in the handguards, which are very, very bright. Now in the rear lighting, you can see there's no dedicated brake light. The brake light is in the turn signals, and that's a point of contention for a lot of us. I feel like that's not great, and the brake lights could be brighter because you lose that dedicated brake light. Okay, now with our engine turned off, so you don't have to listen to that, you've got your, sorry this bike's really dirty, but I haven't had time to clean it yet. I've been riding this bike a ton, a lot of miles on this bike. The headlight, you know, the radar sensor there, your fenders, wheels, we've kind of already covered a lot of that. You can see your front suspension tucked up in here. Radiators, this bike doesn't have any radiator guards, which is disappointing at this price point that you don't have that. Even the bugs are starting to get pretty clogged up in there in the radiator. We'll come back to the windshield and a control setup here in a minute. Coming around kind of the side, you know, the design that's been kind of contentious with this kind of chunky styling. I admit it's been growing on me personally, but I'm not sure about it. You've got kind of these big openings here. So the heat from the radiators, it is actually really well designed because the heat from the radiator can exit through here instead of going onto the rider's leg. So it makes a more comfortable riding experience. Some bikes will have like luggage attachment points here. This bike doesn't have that. I don't even know what package you have to get those. It's got these kind of strange rubber kind of pads up here. I'm not really sure the purpose of that. I guess you could rest your Starbucks coffee right there. That'd be a good spot. Coming around the side, I want to talk about these new crash bars. So in the drop and lift segment, I'll show this, but these little wings that they've added are a big differentiator from the previous design, and it prevents the bike from tipping over too far, and I really feel negates the need. And you can see they also chose not to include upper crash bars, and I think this is why. Also, you get cylinder protectors on these new 1300s, whereas the older GSs, you didn't get that, and you would have to purchase an aftermarket protector for the cylinder because just having a crash bar alone is not enough. When you fall over, you can still put a hole in your engine unless you have some kind of a protection like that. So that's really nice that they've added that. Now, the GSAs, I believe, all come with this kind of control. Or maybe, see, it's so confusing. I think maybe if you get a certain package, maybe you don't get this, but this has an adjustable brake lever like that. It's got larger enduro kind of foot pegs with the removable rubber insert. You can get the same setup on a standard GS as well if you order the right package. You can see the frame, the rear subframe here, the detachable passenger pegs. I like how the exhaust is nice and compact. Here's a tip. If you're going to get one of these, I don't think you should spec the Akrapovic exhaust. This actually sounds better than the Akrapovic, and this doesn't cost anything extra. And this is smaller, and it doesn't get in the way when you're removing the rear tire or wheel from the bike. So I don't know. I don't think that Acra pipe is a good option at all. Just my 2 cents on that one. You can see the luggage carrier. They changed completely the design from the old tubular pannier racks we've seen on the GSs for years, and they've gone to this. How do I say this nicely? I mean, I think the reason they did it, and they're going to say it's some advantage of engineering or design or making it narrow or something, but I would imagine one reason they did this is to force you to purchase their luggage, at least for the first couple of years before the aftermarket can catch up and build stuff that can work with these mounts. Right now, I don't think there's any aftermarket luggage that you can put on this. So you have to buy the expensive BMW luggage. I don't blame them for doing that. It's probably what I would do if I was in charge of BMW accessories. But that's the situation. This bike has the top case carrier, which is electrified. So you can have like power and lights and stuff in your top case. The side luggage is also electrified with the electrical connections here. We've talked about the brake light and kind of the turn signal situation. Coming down here, we can see our shaft drive unit, our rear brake. You know, I mean, at this point, we're starting to get bored. The heated seat switch for the passenger seat is there. Heated seat switch for the driver's seat is in the menu system. There's no hard button anymore. We'll talk about that in a second. You can see the shift lever, foot peg, all that kind of stuff there. And I think that's good for that. So let's start to jump up here into the control area. They give you attachment points for luggage. I believe they sell an accessory tank bag that mounts using these attachment points. So you can look at that if you want. Again, no clutch lever because I have the ASA. So what I have is a drive and manual selection button here. You get this very generously sized phone compartment with USB charging inside of it. So down here you've got a USB port. Now they did go to USB-C. So you need a USB-C cable. That's fine, but just something to keep in mind. You'll need that cable, not a USB-A cable. This is pretty good size and can fit in most average size phones. And then that kind of seals watertight if you want to use that capability. Unlike the old bikes, there is no more USB outlet up here. So the only USB outlet is inside of here. There is a power port over here, not USB, but just a regular power outlet. Let's cover the wind protection and windshield, how that works, and then we'll jump to the rest of the controls. So I do have to power up the bike to show this. So you can see the very large amount of wind protection here with these side sort of clear fairings and then this large windshield. Now I believe there's a couple different windshield setups you might see on the GSAs. One of them looks more like the regular GS with the black parts in the windshield, and this one I believe is the larger windshield setup, which I would recommend getting. It seems to work better because we had other test bikes in our group when I did the group ride with these where this windshield setup was working better for people than the other one. So I'd recommend getting the one that looks like this, which I believe is the larger option. So I have my button here set to the windshield because I adjust it a lot. You can hear it and see the wide range of adjustment that it has, and it is incredibly effective. In the low position, you get some airflow that's smooth. In the high position like this, the wind is over the top of your helmet and is almost like riding a Goldwing. And this is the best of any adventure bike by a pretty significant margin and makes this bike an exceptional touring machine. All right, that's the windshield. Now let's move into the controls. So some of the stuff is familiar, like the Wonder Wheel, how the controls look and feel. What's different, and this is all the same, goes for the regular R1300GS as well. They did away with the ignition, the power button here, which is the first problem because they had to move it here. So this is now your ignition button, this one. The problem with that is you start to give up buttons that were assigned to other functions before. So you've got power mode, stop start, SOS, menu, the up and down button, hamburger button or multi-select button, cruise control, and your other controls. That's drive manual because this is the ASA bike. So here's the main thing with the controls. Here's how it works, and then I'll try to save the complaints for the end. First of all, let's go into the TFT. It's the wonderful TFT that we've been used to. There's nothing wrong with it. It works phenomenally well and is easy to use. So the first option you get if you go in here is My Vehicle. Then you can see different information about your bike, your computers, their onboard computers, tire pressures, all that kind of stuff. If you go into Sport, it doesn't change the riding mode. You change the riding mode over here, but it changes the dash display into this, and you can see your braking and your traction control being applied. It also shows you your lean angle, so if you want to compete with your buddies for who can get the most lean angle out there on Palomar, where you're getting your knee down on your GS right before you have a big low side and go into the guardrail, you can see your maximum lean angles there. So that's cool. Then, so if we go out of that, and I go back in here, navigation, media, telephone. Okay, I'm not going to get into those in this video. But if you go into settings, you can go into assist, you can configure your suspension damping. So here you can configure the damping, you can customize your damping for the different damping modes, which is road dynamic and enduro. That's great that you can have that. Cruise control settings in here, you can turn off the adaptive cruise if you want, and you can set how the cruise control works. From collision warning, lane change warning, hill start control, which I have set to automatic. Vehicle settings, vehicle settings, go in here, and then you've got riding mode pre-selection. So you've got all these riding modes. You can only select 4 to be enabled at a given time, which you then cycle through with the road mode through your 4 modes. So depending on your preferences, you can select which ones you want to have pulled up through the riding mode button. Different settings here, that's fine. I'm not going to go into all that. And then you've got connections and display. That's probably enough with that. So I said I was going to save my complaint for the end. So here's the thing. So I've got on the old bikes, remember you had buttons for traction control and ABS and heating. All that's gone. So if I want to turn on my heated grips and my heated seat, well, there's no button to do that. So, but what you can do is if you hold this, if you press this, the multi-rocker switch is what they call it. You can use this multi-rocker switch to control, you can choose what to control. I have it set to the windshield. You can set it to the heating, the cruise control distance, the traction control, the damping, or the ride height. But that's a lot. You have to choose which one. And then you have a second setting. You see how it says hold? So I have the hold down function set to heating. So let me show you how this works. Right now, if I press this is my windshield. If I hold this down, then it pulls out my heating, which I could then use it goes away too fast, but I could then use my controls here to change my seat and my grip heating. But if I want to do ABS, if I want to do traction control, if I want to do ride height, if I want to do ACC, I have to go back and switch that back and forth. And you end up when you're riding having to go into the menu. That's not good because that's distracting. So I think that they should improve this control layout interface so you have less menu jumping to do the things that you want to do. All right, let's do a little performance runs, 0 to 80 to 0 with this bike. I will do some in the automatic shifting mode just to show you, and then I'll go into the manual shifting mode because this bike is ASA and show you kind of the differences there. But the bike has so much power and torque, it's almost hard to control these performance testing, and you need the traction control and ABS systems so you don't get out of hand and have an accident. That's how much power these bikes have. All right, so let's start in the automatic mode. That's probably about as fast as I've ever done on one of these tests in terms of the time it takes to get from 0 to 80 back to 0. It would probably be even faster if I used manual shifting and took off some of the traction control that was cutting the power. The braking system on this bike is probably the best in the world because of the tail lever suspension keeps the chassis flat when you're braking. The linked brakes apply both brakes for you in the right proportion, so I'm only using the front brake lever. So what it means is that you can stop this bike probably safer and faster than probably any other motorcycle on the planet. It's a big benefit and why so many riders choose a GS or something like an RT or another bike with tail lever and linked braking. I mean, the term stop on a dime, it actually applies here on this bike. Okay, so I'm going to go into manual shifting mode. I'm going to first gear and we'll do this a little bit more. Yeah, dude, that is that gets your heart going. It is rapid. Of course, you know, an S1000RR is faster and all that technically, but I think in a real world this is probably faster because of the suspension and how the brakes work, and the torque is so powerful on this bike. So yeah, I guess it's high performance. So in addition to the incredible touring comfort, the legitimate off-road ability, the everyday practicality, you get a super high performance engine and super high performance brakes that in the real world allow you to ride almost alarmingly fast for the conditions. This bike is so confidence inspiring, it's almost hilarious. Just fly into corners. You got so much trail braking ability. Alright, let's do some off-roading with the 1300GS Adventure. Fire road, Jeep road kind of thing, typical kind of stuff you're going to probably do if you have a bike this big. You know, technical single track, anything really rough, just leave that to a smaller motorcycle. So, a couple things on the setup with this. There's a few things going on with this particular bike you got to be aware of. So it's got the adaptive ride height, and what that means is that, so when you're in the road riding modes, it automatically lowers at a stop. However, when you go into the off-road modes, Enduro or Enduro Pro as I use, you have to choose your ride height. So what this looks like is, I've got to start the bike to do this. So see, it just raised up. So you have to choose low or high, and you can set that here. So if I lower it, I can feel the bike lowering. Lowers 1.3 inches or 30 millimeters, or I can raise it up. Now for off-road, I recommend having it in the high setting because, you know, a little bit better ground clearance and you get a little bit more travel out of the suspension. And if you go back into your road modes, then it's going to go back in to the setting where it automatically lowers when you're at a stop. Now, even if you're in the off-road mode and you turn the bike off, what you notice is, you can't see it on camera probably, but the bike still lowers when you turn the ignition off. Just not when you come to a stop with the bike still running, it won't automatically lower in the road modes. That's for the adaptive ride height. Now, also in terms of suspension, well, let's back up a second. So, why isn't this okay? So ride modes, yeah, Enduro and then Enduro Pro. Now, they gave us the ability, I'll show you here, to set the damping. And so what I have it is, so suspension, damping configuration. Okay, see, I've got Enduro set to -1. I find that to be better. It just gives me a better ride. You can adjust that plus or minus depending on how you want Enduro damping to feel. That's great that they've added that. The old GSs didn't have that. This is a huge upgrade to be able to have that. So let's back out of this. Also, in terms of ride modes, you know, it changes your ABS setting. So Enduro Pro turns off the rear ABS and leaves the front on, and that's how I like to ride these bikes. Now, another thing, my bike, you know, I've got the ASA bike, and there's a separate video on the ASA system, so I'm trying not to focus on that in this review. So we can either ride in automatic shifting, or I can take manual shifting control. So I'll just go ahead and ride in manual mode, which means I shift with my foot lever, I just don't have a clutch. So in terms of taking off, it's actually extremely easy. You just gently feed in the throttle. If you want to do low speed maneuvers with a bike like this, or the Hondas with the DCT, all you have to do is drag the rear brake and then apply throttle against the rear brake, and you can do great low speed turns and stuff. Here, I'll show you. So I can do really low speed U-turns. I'm not putting a foot down right now. 1 mile an hour, I'm balancing the bike. Okay, I had to dab there because I got a little bit out of hand. But you can see low speed maneuverability is really good. Sometimes you don't even have to drag the rear brake, it just depends. But the ASA doesn't seem to impede my low speed control at all. In fact, I think it kind of helps. Shifting is very smooth. Now as you start to ride this bike off-road, you know, it's a GS Adventure. It's a 600 plus pound motorcycle, and you feel the weight of it, you know, over the bumps and stuff. You feel that weight going through the bumps, and although the bike handles well for its weight, because the center of gravity is not too bad with the boxer motor, you just have to cruise. You just have to take your time and don't smash into stuff really hard. But for terrain like this, it's actually fairly rocky and bumpy, not difficult at all. This kind of bike is actually fine. Just don't go too fast, because you'll start to break things or break yourself. But the bike is very comfortable doing this kind of riding. The Enduro Pro traction control is very good. It allows a good amount of slip without being too crazy with the slip, but you can still use a lot of throttle and get a lot of forward progress even with that Enduro Pro traction control on. Riding through those sharp rocks like that, telelever suspension doesn't love rocks and sharp edge hits because of the way the suspension has to move. And that's always the thing with these GS's. You will get used to how the bike rides and handles. It goes around corners well. It accelerates, shoots away quickly with acceleration. And then if you want to talk about braking, the off-road braking system of the GS is the best in the business. It's unbelievably good. You can stop this thing from, and I've done it, from 100 miles an hour in the dirt. You can stop one of these very quickly by just applying a whole crap ton of front brake, because the linked braking, it applies the rear brake for you. With the front ABS, it keeps your front from locking, and you can, and because the suspension stays flat, you can stop these bikes so incredibly quickly on the dirt. It's almost hard to believe what's happening. The bike just kind of tractors and chugs along. It feels pretty much like the GS did before, where it's, should we do that? I don't think we should do that. The ergonomics for standing are good. They feel very nice and natural. And in fact, you really do want to stand up, even on easy terrain on these GS's. The bike is so heavy that if you want to have any influence over the control of this heavy of a bike, it really helps to stand up so you can move things around better and influence the bike more. If you sit down, you're kind of along for the ride. It's okay, you can do it, but standing up is better. What I was saying earlier is the differences between this and the older 1250s and 1200s. I think that the main difference off-road is the suspension is better on the new one for sure. You know, it doesn't have the weird rebound kind of bouncing around in the rear suspension that the old bike did. I think you have better damping control, you have better damping adjustment, it feels more connected to the trail. You've got the dual spring rate. So yeah, off-road, it's a little bit better than the outgoing bike, but there's no getting around just the giant weight and size of these things at the end of the day. It's pretty impressive how you can throw these things around and kind of steer them pretty quickly to pick your line. They handle better than you would think.
Let's talk about the road performance of the R1300GS Adventure. I've been lucky to ride this bike nearly 1,500 miles on some of California's best roads, but also including droning down the highway for extended periods. Let's start with touring performance and overall comfort. At higher speeds, you sit in a bubble of super calm, quiet air behind the electrically adjustable windshield. The engine has taller gearing than the 1250 GS, so the bike feels more relaxed at higher speeds. There is effectively zero vibration reaching the rider. You can use the radar adaptive cruise control to pace the traffic in front of you, and if you get the ASA transmission, it will even shift gears for you, meaning all you really need to do is steer the bike. The included blind spot monitors alert you when there is a vehicle in your blind spot, which I found to be very useful. Put simply, this is one of the best touring motorcycles I've ever tested, and it really makes you question the need for bikes like the RT, the Goldwing, and other heavier tours. And with 8 gallons or 30 liters of fuel on board, you can ride over 350 miles or 560 kilometers between fuel stops. When it's time to get rowdy on twisty roads, the weight of the GSA melts away and the bike is surprisingly agile and responsive. With a click of a button, you can firm up the suspension, and you can also change ride modes for a sharper throttle response and less intrusive ABS and traction control. The enormous engine torque means you don't have to shift very often to make rapid progress. Trail braking into corners is aided by the tail lever suspension, which keeps the chassis flat and composed even under hard braking at high lean angles. If you get the ASA transmission, be prepared to use the manual mode for dynamic riding, as the bike will tend to be in too high of a gear in almost every situation if left in fully automatic shifting mode. In terms of comfort, you have a seat that's more comfortable than the one on the standard R1300GS, and you can adjust it for angle and for height. Wind protection is class-leading, and the rider triangle is generous even for taller riders, although you can get different seats and foot pegs to adjust your legroom as needed.
All right, so doing a summary of the pros and cons to the 1300GS Adventure. I might gloss over some stuff. I've covered a lot of it in the other parts of this review, but as a summary, because some people only watch this section of these reviews, for me a pro is I think the overall versatility of this bike is pretty much unmatched by maybe any other motorcycle, except maybe the Multistrada V4 Rally, I think would be the next closest in terms of, if you look at its capability from touring to sport riding to off-road to everyday commuting and all those things in one bike, this is so hard to beat in that regard. Another pro for me is just the overall refinement and build quality is what we've come to expect from BMW. Another pro for me is the technology on the bike. Generally, with some exceptions that I've talked about, generally the technology works pretty well and gives you and your passenger a better riding experience. Another pro for me, what I talked about in the ergonomics section, where we looked at the much wider range of seat heights with the variable ride height control you can get on, adaptive ride height control you can get on this bike. That's a huge pro, because they've taken this model, which previously was really only accessible to the tallest people out there, and they made it accessible to a lot more people without compromising the comfort or the legroom. That's 2 thumbs up. Next is a pro for me. The overall engine power and torque from this machine is really phenomenal. The horsepower is not class leading, however, the torque is, and you feel that torque at all RPM. Another pro for me is the fuel range. Exceptional fuel range on this bike. 350 miles, I'll put the kilometers here. There's not many motorcycles where you can get that. Another pro for me is the really class-leading wind deflection, the wind protection, the coverage of it, the quietness of the windshield. You sit in a quiet bubble behind this, and the electric adjustability means that right on your handlebar control, no more taking your hand off to do the little thumb wheel on the old bike. Now it's just this dip switch here, up and down. It makes life so nice. Now the list of things I don't like is pretty short, but there are some notable exceptions there. Just by nature of this bike with the large fuel tank, a lot of the weight's carried up high. It is still a tall, still a heavy and somewhat top-heavy feeling motorcycle. And you really have to factor that into your decision with whether you get this or whether you get the standard GS, which has a much lighter, more compact, less heavy feeling to it, especially at slow speeds or when you're parked. Another downside for me, and this is going to be a bit of a controversial one for some of you, but I still don't understand why the touring model has more suspension travel and is taller by default than the standard GS. That seems like it's reversed. In my opinion, I think BMW should consider that for the future, because people who want to go off-road, they're either buying the 900 GS or a smaller dual sport motorcycle, or they're buying the regular 1300 GS and getting sport suspension if they want that off-road ability, and you can get all your enduro packages on that. This is more of the touring package, although it does still have the off-road ability. So to me, being taller really doesn't make any sense. Another big downside that really is a legitimate thing that we all of us who have these bikes talk about is the control interface really needs improving. The fact that you have to go into the menus to access a lot of your commonly used settings really is not very well implemented, and I think they could really improve that. Another downside for me is on the ASA in particular, this only applies to the ASA automated shift assistant option if you get that, is inconsistent shift quality. When you let the motorcycle shift for you in the automatic drive modes, the shifts are lurchy. It's like that. And part of the reason you would get an automatic is for smoother shifting, especially if you're carrying a passenger back here. So I think they missed the mark on that a bit, and I think they need to refine that further. Now, I will say that I still use the automatic mode. I still love having that option when I'm tired and I don't want to shift. And when you shift with the foot lever, it acts as a quick shifter. You can go into manual shifting mode, so it doesn't shift for you. You shift with the foot lever, the shifts are perfectly smooth as glass. So I don't understand the discrepancy there. Overall, this is not as good of an automatic shift system as Honda's DCT or dual clutch transmission, because it can't match the smoothness of shifting of that Honda unit. Competitors to the GSA, what else should you be looking at? Well, you may be thinking, should I just get the regular GS? Okay, so do you want or need the huge fuel tank, the extra wind protection, some of the extra standard features like the standard crash bars and that? And what do you think about the styling? And you're going to pay a little bit more for a GSA, although the difference is not that big, honestly. So that's your decision there. The regular GS is much slimmer, smaller, feels a lot lighter, sportier. They have a somewhat similar feel when you ride them, except you have this kind of big mass up here with all this wind protection. I mean, it's a tough choice, right? I think that the regular GS is, unless you need the huge fuel tank and you want the extra, wind protection of this, then the regular GS makes a lot of sense. And off-road, it's smaller and more manageable, and you could get different off-road packages with that. I don't know. I think that's something you should look at. I think this is more of the touring option. Now, BMW also has the RT. I think the GSA and the RT is always an interesting comparison. You get the off-road ability baked in here if you ever need it, and you just don't get that with the RT. That's the main reason more people buy these than the RTs. Also, this has a bit more legroom and a bit more upright riding position than an RT. Handling, I think the RTs handle better because they have smaller wheels. You get better wind protection on the RT because you get a full fairing, even more so than this. So you should look at that, but I know this is still going to be more popular. The two, going outside of BMW, I think that the two bikes that features-wise would be the closest to this would be the Ducati Multistrada V4 Rally version. The Rally has the larger fuel tank and some extra things on it. And then Triumph's Tiger 1200 GT Explorer. So they make the Rally Explorer, which is 21-inch front wheel, and the GT Explorer, which is 19-inch front wheel. So the Multistrada V4 Rally is sportier, faster, more power, a little bit lighter, more fun to ride, more personality, I would say. The capabilities are similar between the two. I might give a slight edge in road handling to the Ducati. Off-road, they're close. I mean, that's not much between them. The practical features, though, BMW wins on practicality because electric windshield, you can't get that at Ducati. Shaft drive, can't get that with Ducati. Ducati does have some kind of a lowering system on the suspension, but it doesn't lower as much as this, and it's not as effective. So there is that. You know, it's a tough one. Now, the Tiger 1200 is too often overlooked. It's a very good motorcycle overall. The overall refinement and some of the details are not there with the Tiger. They're just not up to spec. The way the electronics work, the low-speed fueling and control, the top heaviness of it, it doesn't feel as balanced as these do. It just feels like a generation behind from the Ducati and the BMW, in my honest opinion. What about a Honda Africa Twin Adventure Sport? Yeah, I mean, okay, you're getting there. I mean, a lot less money though, a lot less power, a lot less torque, a lot less features, a lot less luxury. It's kind of an apples to oranges comparison, but that's something you should look at as well. Final thoughts on BMW's R1300GS Adventure. This may be the overall best motorcycle in the world right now that I know of. Regardless of what you think of the styling, which I admit is controversial, and personally I'm not really a fan of that, the overall combination that this bike gives you between incredible touring performance and touring comfort, genuine off-road ability, all the different suspension options and packages and heights you can get, the luxury and technological features, the sport riding ability, dynamic riding, twisty roads, the better suspension performance, the better road feel that you have now. You get a shaft drive, so you don't have chain maintenance. The bike is low to the ground when you want it, as long as you get the adaptive ride height control. The wind protection is the best out there. This really is the total package of an adventure touring, and I think touring with a capital T, right? If you wanted adventure touring with a capital A on adventure, you'd get something smaller for more off-road. But if you want the touring emphasis, this is it. This is the one you should get. And I've tested them all, and I still don't love the styling, but I have to admit this is maybe the best motorcycle that I've ever tested. All right, well, I hope this review has covered everything you want to know about this GS Adventure. If I missed something, put that down in the comments below and I will do my absolute best to get back to you. If you like what I'm doing here, support the channel, do all the stuff, subscribe, comment, like, use the affiliate links, and I really appreciate that. I've also got Patreon as well. All right, I think that about does it. Thanks for watching. Ride safe. I'll see you out there.